Hi. It's Kenny. Greetings and welcome back. It's really nice to have you along for this jazz ride, a journey through jazz vinyl. Give me that down-home religion and that uptown jazz vinyl. That's what I always say. You know, I have this jazz vinyl lovers group. People post records. I have one rule in the group. I only got one rule. I mean, beside the obvious rules of, you know, don't post Madonna records or don't post Metallica CDs, even though some people don't even want to do that. The other day, some guy posted an Alice Cooper record. I'm like, please, jazz vinyl, you know, not Alice Cooper. And then my other rule, those are the guidelines. I have two things that can never be posted. I automatically take them down. Any reference to Kenny G. The worst thing about Kenny G, besides the fact that he has a horrible tone and he can't play and his music is shit, is that some people hear that back in the day when that was actually popular. Remember those Michael Bolton, Kenny G duets? I mean, it's like watching a gorilla and a parakeet go at it. I mean, what the F, man? But the worst thing about that music, when it was popular, and I still see the result of that, is some people think that's jazz. Can you imagine having never heard Duke Ellington or Miles Davis or Eddie Lockjaw Davis or Cal Tjader or Vince Guaraldi or Coltrane, and somebody plays with that and goes, oh, this is jazz. Well, you'd never listen to that crap either. I think if the average person could actually hear jazz, someone who's never heard jazz, especially kids, if you play kids, little children, or I guess up to like 9 or 10 jazz, they'll dance because they feel the rhythms, because the rhythms are so, you know, infectious and irresistible. But, you know, in America, we have a war on culture in general, but especially on jazz, because people don't even know what it means anymore, and it really rubs me the wrong way when I'll just like to say, you know, any reference to Kenny G will be deleted from our group. People are like, oh, well, no, Kenny G is music. People will constantly fight for their, you know, right to be as stupid as they want to be. I think I wrote in one post, you know, you're fighting, you know, for swill, you know, racing to the bottom while you're surrounded by riches. Why are we even having this conversation? Now, you could say, oh, man, just let it pass. Don't make such a big deal out of it. But I see it as a real insult to this great American art form. That's an insult on the life of all these great artists who made all this incredible music. Does somebody think that's jazz? So anyway, I delete that right away. But people are always, just because it's the internet, people always want to poke you. They want to prod you. Oh, yeah, let's give you some Kenny G. Anyway, today we're going back to a tried and true favorite of mine, 5x5, where I just pull 5 records out. I know not what they are, even though I do know these are all my Blue Note records, and Music Matters and all that swill, more Music Matters and that kind of stuff, Impulse records, and then A to Z, just jazz. Even though I thought recently maybe I should do a Jazz Shepherd thing and alphabetize them, because some things, if you know where your Savoy records are, you can find them. If you know where your Bethlehem records are, I have very few, you can find them. That's why, you know, the Impulse records are easy to find because they're black and orange. But some of these things, where are they? So I probably need to do that myself. But anyway, I'll just pull out a record and see if I can have anything intelligent to say about it. And I'm going to pull down here because I kind of know what all this is. I don't know what these are. And I'll show you, I got these spiffy new vinyl revival things to make your records flush. Oh, The Hustler with Paul Newman. Soundtrack by Kenyon Hopkins. I have a mono and a stereo copy of this. This is such a great movie if you haven't seen it. You know, it's the perfect epitome of jazz is something evil and bad for your children. And, you know, they like jazz when they're not shooting pool or having sex. You know, they listen to that evil jazz music. But this is a phenomenal movie with Jackie Gleason as Minnesota Fats. And I forgot who Paul Newman plays. I think it's a fictional character. And the great Piper Laurie and the amazing George Scott as George Newman's manager. You know, to me, the ultimate movie soundtrack for this 50s, 60s thing is The Sweet Smell of Success, I believe, by Elmer Bernstein. That is just an insane soundtrack. It's just so full of life, and it illustrates what's happening in the streets of New York and in that movie while it's happening. And this one does it to a similar degree. And this is not Cap Records. Robert Rossini's The Hustler. And this is both of those records are really hard to find. I'm lucky to have both of them. The Hustler and the soundtrack to Sweet Smell of Success. Collecting jazz soundtracks or movie soundtracks is a real blast through the 50s, 60s, and 70s because there's so many great composers. Elmer Bernstein, Lalo Schifrin, Jerry Goldsmith, so many great, John Barry did all the stuff for James Bond, and that's a little nostalgic, but it's still really beautiful. And you could spend a lot of time just buying those soundtracks. And people aren't really hip to them. They don't really care about those soundtracks, so they're pretty cheap. I bought a bunch of those for a while. The soundtrack to The Saint. Back in the 90s, I even made a big compilation CD of all these blaxploitation soundtracks. And, I think blaxploitation soundtracks have their essence in this. Then you have people like Johnny Pate and Willie Hutch, creating those wide span, really beautiful soundtracks for Foxy Brown and all those movies, Hell Up in Harlem, and They Call Him Mr. Tibbs, and all those amazing blaxploitation movies. That's a whole nother world. And it's funny, I don't see that stuff posted a lot. There must be a blaxploitation group. Those records are really hard to find. They're as hard to find as any jazz record. Anyway, number one, The Hustler by Kenyon Hopkins. Kenyon Hopkins did a lot of soundtracks. They were kind of tepid. This one's better than that. Okay, let's pull from behind me here. Eddie Lockjaw Davis. I've talked about that enough, so I'm going to find something else. Let's pull over here. Okay, this is good. These are cheap records when you find them. Jazz in Japan on VJ Records. Recorded in Tokyo, Toshiko Mariano and her big band. Featuring Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Sleepy Matsumo, and Shegu Suzuki. There are a lot of Toshiko Akiyoshi, that's her name. There are quite a few of her records, and they're really cheap, and those are beautiful recordings. She was a wonderful pianist. I think she's still alive. Absolutely fantastic. These are great records. There she is with Jimmy Cobb. And you can find her records for a song. Why she's... Her first record, I think if you find the original edition, is quite valuable. It's her coming through like a turnstile at an airport or something, coming out through the open doors. But brilliant player, epitomizes the beauty of the Japanese jazz, the love they have for jazz. I think she's probably one of their greatest musicians. In the more, I wouldn't call it straight ahead or hard bop. She's a classicist. I think of her along with Hank Jones and Tommy Flanagan. She's really, really wonderful pianist. And now that we have so many reissues, you see a lot of stuff being reissued by Japanese artists that I am not aware of at all. In the group, we have people who post Japanese jazz records I've never seen. I bought one a couple of years ago by a drummer who had lost his legs. I forgot his name. That was an astounding record. We are so cordoned off to the influence of other countries who like jazz in this country. So, that's probably the best thing about my Jazz Vinyl Lovers group is we have people from all over the world posting records you've just never seen or never see again. We'll never see in the flesh, like those Japanese records. But this is a great record. But all her records are just top, man. They're just beautiful player, beautiful ideas, great style, great realizations, great arrangements. I cannot recommend Toshiko Akiyoshi enough. So, one to get. Joe Henderson with Al Foster. I could talk about this, but I won't. Find something right behind me. Oh! Dave Holland jumping in. Steve Coleman, Steve Ellington, Julian Priester, Kenny Wheeler. This is an interesting record on many levels. I think my favorite, one of my most favorite Dave Holland records is it called Meant to Be? It's a big band record, and man, it is just phenomenal. All his records are great. A lot of people like Conference of the Birds. This is on ECM Digital, back when people were proud of the digital thing. 1984. Really, really interesting cross-generational lineup. Dave Holland, Steve Coleman, Kenny Wheeler, rest his soul, Julian Priester, Steve Ellington. The drummer Steve Ellington also played with Stan Rivers. Was not heavily recorded, but I really like his style. He's very loose, very open player. Julian Priester, I don't know as much about Julian Priester. Not as much of a fan. Kenny Wheeler, I have a lot of Kenny Wheeler ECM records. Those are all, that's another label I need to have its own spot, is all the ECM records. Kenny Wheeler is one of the, the heroes of ECM. Beautiful tone, beautiful arrangements, great compositions. sort of like early, to my way of thinking, a little bit like early Keith Jarrett when he's on ECM. Just in the sort of palettes they use, the arranging styles they use. Steve Coleman, you know, who is a major influence on and many composers today, an extremely important composer. I personally don't really care for his music. It's all cycles and it seems to lack emotion. It's all just cycles and rhythms. And I think about what John Riley told me, that he teaches, you know, the drummer for the Village Vanguard big band. He said that, and I don't think he was referring to that style, that composers now and people in school are exploring rhythm because they've explored melody, so now they're going through with rhythm. And Coleman just has these cycling ideas and patterns and rhythms and melodies, and sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. Coleman is in a big brouhaha at the moment with Maria Grand. Actually, the brouhaha is over. Dave Holland is one of those guys. All his records are great. Obviously, he's a great bass player. All the work he did with Miles. Just so many records. You can almost buy a Dave Holland record, and that's like a sign of approval that you'll dig the record. This one, I really haven't listened to it that much. You know, Holland's a great figure. He's getting older, and all these masters from the 60s and 70s are getting older. And so the masters coming up, Kenny Wheeler died. Steve Coleman is a master in his own way. So I love all these ECM records. I love that sound. I love the performances. It seems like people either love ECM or they hate it. I think it's great. I love that sort of frigid Norwegian, is a German sound, the beautiful, a lot of ambient textures in the music, and the studio is an instrument. And I do know, I forgot who told me that Manfred Eicher had a big part in all the records on the label. You know, he would dictate sort of what was happening to some degree, and I don't know if he does it on the current stuff. I still love all the modern music they put out. It's all classical and chamber oriented, but there's a beautiful thread in there, and there's still some wonderful jazz trios on ECM. What are we up to? 3. Let's pull a Blue Note record. Hank Mobley, No Room for Squares. United Artists, Blue Label, White Note. You know, my feeling about these Blue Label White Notes, or vice versa, Blue Label Black Notes, and the twofers, the sort of the tannish twofers. I'm starting to think those tannish twofers actually sound better than these United Artists records. Everything with Rudy changes so much from record to record, from year to year. But regardless, this is one of my favorite Hank Mobley records. Right up there with Workout and Caddy for Daddy and Soul Station, Roll Call. I mean, he was just hitting on all fours. Great compositions. Philly Joe Jones, what a lineup. Lee Morgan, Donald Byrd, Andrew Hill, Herbie Hancock, John Orr on bass, and Butch Warren on bass, I believe. Philly Joe Jones. This little sticker means that it has been ultrasonically cleaned. When people come in the Jazz Record Center, if they already have Miles, if they already have Coltrane, this is where I steer them. Maybe I'll steer them to Monk or Mingus. I'll probably steer them to Mingus first. If they want to buy a few records, Mobley, Mungus, and Mink. Those are the guys you want to get. But, you know, just... I like the fact that I think Hank Mobley enjoys more appreciation of his art than he did then. A few years ago, well, many years ago, Don Sickler did a big presentation. Don Sickler, married to Maureen Sickler, who runs our Rudy Van Gelder studio now, did a big presentation of all his tunes at Lincoln Center, I believe. And he, you know, Mobley is just, you know, perfect. I think he was a perfect artist. These are perfect records, and that they're beautifully realized. They're great tunes. The arrangements are really nice. The sequencing of the tunes are really great. To me, when they made these records, as a musician, these were hard charts. The Lee Morgan charts too, the Freddie Hubbard charts, those are hard to play. I mean, back when I was a drummer, that shit's hard, man. You got to make all the hits. I mean, once you're swinging, it's fine, but you got to make all those hits. And it's like a serpentine path, some of these charts. So my feeling is that when they were making these records, they weren't thinking about anything outside of the studio. They weren't thinking about their wives. They weren't thinking about their kids. I don't believe they were thinking about civil rights. I believe they were, because they were musicians, they were focusing on these charts to cut those charts to the best of their ability. And you can hear it on these records. The performances are amazing. You know, records, unlike a live performance, the records are where we go in to document compositions. The stage is where jazz lives and takes off, as you can hear in the new John Coltrane, Love Supreme Live in Seattle, which is the same as the studio record, but it's exploded and expanded with improvisations. In the same way, these were documents. They went into the studio to document these compositions. Now I think the compositions did, I mean, if you look at a lot of the titles, like I'm playing a Jackie Mack record right now, It's Time, all these, a lot of these albums and compositions had references to civil rights, and I think they were thinking about those in the 60s as they were writing them. But I think when they're recording, this is just my take on it, they have a limited amount of time to get perfect takes. Granted, Blue Note guys were doing rehearsals earlier, and that's why the Blue Note records are cut above all the other hard bop labels of that time. But I really think they're focusing, because, I think it was 3-hour sessions. I think that might be even true today. You get paid as a union musician in 3-hour blocks, I believe. And you're paying for studio time. Well, you're not, but Alfred Lion is. But if you look at Rudy Van Gelder's, just look at his recording schedule, he was knocking out things day after day after day after day. So everybody is fully aware they're in there to do the best they can. And you can hear that on a record such as this. Just so many great solos and perfect ensemble parts and amazing individual solos, and that's why Blue Note is loved, because this music in a lot of ways is perfect from start to finish. The melodies, the performance, the compositions, the arrangements, the endings, they're all playing as one, and it's a sliver in time, really. What, 15 years, mid-50s through the 60s? So that's why we love these records, even if they're cut out. I have no idea what's down here. Oh, I pulled out two. We're going to do two. First, we're going to do Ralph Peterson, the drummer, the inheritor of Art Blakey's flame, both literally and figuratively. He died just a year ago now, 6 months ago. Ralph Peterson was a force in nature. He had a forceful personality. Ralph Peterson had a huge spirit, a huge talent. Later in his life, when he was battling cancer for many years, he was still teaching really hard. He was also a trumpet player, so he came at music from both the high and the low. I sometimes think of as music as being from the ground up like funk, or from the top down like a lot of jazz, where you have a lot of horns. But he was just a fireball, and he did these few albums on Blue Note Japan, and they're still not. These haven't been reissued. These should be Tone Poets. These Ralph Peterson records are frickin' phenomenal. In a way, he's really the inheritor of people like Lee Morgan, and well, definitely in Art Blakey and Hank Mobley, because the arrangements on here and the dynamics are just off the chain, man. Great tunes, great solos, incredibly dynamic, very abrupt changes. And he was just, the epitome of muscular, but also flowing, just like Art Blakey. This is V. He did 3 or 4 albums for Blue Note Japan. At the time, these came out domestically, but now I think Blue Note Japan owns the copyright to these records, so they still didn't come out here, which I think is a crime. Joe Harley, my brother, are you listening to me? And then, since we're talking about bass players again, Nils, double bass, Sam Jones with Nils Henning Orsted Pederson. I like Sam Jones. Sam Jones is great. He played on several Riverside, a lot of records, but I love Nils Henning Orsted Pederson. Oh, he's got the big sound, the great ideas, the hard walking. Rick Beato played a video about a couple months ago called The Greatest Solo of All Time. And it was Oscar Peterson with Nils Henning Orsted Pederson and Barney Kessel. It's an incredible solo by Oscar Peterson. The other two take a break, and he is just flying through meters and styles and piano styles and musical styles. It is amazing. And at one point, when Peterson's about to alert the other two, he double times it, and Pederson and Kessel kind of look at each other like, oh brother, and they hop on and take off, and they take solos in this very fast style. And for me, there's a few players that I'll buy the record just because they're on it. Nils Henning Orsted Pederson is one of those guys. Any record with Philly Joe Jones, I like Philly Joe Jones better than Billy Higgins. That's just me, even though they were a similar era. Any record with Kenny Burrell, really. Any record with Kenny Clark. I mean, you're going to get a certain quality level. So this is these two guys playing acoustic bass solos. This is on Inner City. I'll let you in on a secret. It's not really a secret, it's somebody's opinion. I interviewed Giles Peterson for a new British jazz feature that's in the current issue of Stereophile. And Giles Peterson said, don't tell anybody, but Start collecting Inner City. That's what I'm collecting now. They're very hard records to find. He mentioned Inner City and Muse. When I used to work at the Jazz Record Center in the early 90s, those records were common as dirt. You know, Muse is sort of that funky. Some of the Muse recordings, the studios sound a little murky. It's like coming out of that the mainstream record label, same thing. You can tell they're coming out of the 70s and everything is padded and very, very dead. Nothing rings. But there are some great records on Muse off the top of my head. There's a bunch of Walter Bishop records. There are great Mickey Tucker records on Muse. And earlier when we were doing Dave Holland, I was thinking, doesn't Dave Holland have a duo record like that? But Dave Holland has a duo record with Sam Rivers. It's kind of a scratchy recording, but that is a killer record. This is not just duets. This is a full band, I forgot. Sam Jones on bass, Philip Catherine on guitar, who's just amazing on this record, and speak of the devil, Billy Higgins on drums, Albert Tootie Heath on percussion on one track. You know, I often go, when I have time, every 6 months, I'll go through my system and my records and try to purge, because I don't have any room. I'm surrounded by records all over the floor here in my little apartment, so I'm constantly purging, and this is one record that I cannot purge. It's just such a great, beautiful, dynamic recording. Doing standards, Falling in Love with Love, Giant Steps, I Fall in Love Too Easily, Miss Morgan, that's interesting, Au Prévoir, Yesterday's Little Train, 1977 on Inner City, and everything on Inner City is hard swinging. It's from the 70s. It's great players. I think a lot of them are cut in Europe. Is that 5? We'll do one more. Oh, this is really cool. MPS. MPS has been reissued a couple times in the last 2 or 3 years. And obviously the great Some Other Time by Bill Evans that Zev Feldman from Renaissance put out again. But MPS had so many records and a lot of amazing records. I think of Joe Pass, Continental is on MPS. There's a Singers Unlimited on MPS with Oscar Peterson. That's really just a lot of really cool records. Don Ellis record, a lot of stuff. And there's such a beautiful story of the studio in the Black Forest. And I only saw this record once at the store, and so I picked it up. It's a double LP, The Band, The Alpine Power Plant, recorded in Switzerland. And it's a hell of a lineup. George Gruntz, Daniel Humer, Nils, Henning, Orsted, Pederson again. Bunch of horn players I don't know. Virgil Jones, Dusko Gojkovic, Woody Shaw, Frank Ambrosetti on guitar. Dexter Gordon, Herb Geller, Sahib Shihab. And this is it's actually a sort of avant-garde, as I recall. I mean, you think with Dexter Gordon and Frank Ambrosetti, but Dexter Gordon and Woody Shaw, you're thinking, okay, burning straight ahead. But this record is a little bit avant-garde. And one that I kept, just a great burning. The co-leaders are Flavio and Franco Ambrosetti, George Gruntz, and Daniel Humer. So, one of my favorite MPS records. MPS is another, you can almost buy anything on that label, and they're very hard to find. It's weird for a while. They were MPS, then they merged with BASF, which made, from what I recall, really shitty cassette tapes in the 70s. They weren't as good as Sony or TDK. But anyway, this is a really cool record, and just an unusual record. There are so many things that have been recorded in Europe in particular that we Americans don't know anything about, that we don't have access to. That's why we travel. That's why we leave our country and go to other countries, to become learned of other cultures and to realize we are not the only ape men on the earth. We are ape men here in the U.S., but so many Americans, I wonder if half of our U.S. population ever left the country? I know the first place I ever went was London, and I was just in love with it. It was everything I've ever dreamt of. You got to travel so you can buy more records. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.